Senator from Vermont is recognized.
I would ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I want to very briefly do three things this afternoon. Number one, there are a lot of politicians and pundits and economists who are proclaiming all over the country that the recession is over, and they have some economic models by which they determine that the recession is over. I would suggest to those pundits and economists and politicians to take a look at the booklet that we recently produced in my office. It's called Struggling Through the Recession, Letters from Vermont, and we've also received letters from other states, people in other states as well. And what these letters tell us, and I should tell you that we sent out a request for people to tell us, as we enter the third year of this recession, what is happening in their lives. And we got, from my small state, over 400 responses. That's a lot from a small state, and we got probably an equal number from around the rest of the country. And one of the problems that I had with these letters is that some of them are so painful to read that it's hard to read more than a few at a time, because you really, you get sick to your stomach seeing what good and decent and hardworking people are going through. And I just want to take a few moments today, Mr. President, to read just a handful of the letters that I'm receiving from Vermont in answer to the question, is the recession over? This comes from a young lady from central Vermont, and she says, quote, I've been fortunate to hold on to my job throughout the past 3 years, especially since I have about $42,000 remaining on my school loans. And, Mr. President, one of the recurring themes that we hear from all over Vermont, and I suspect that it is true in New Mexico and all over this country, is a lot of young people are graduating with a heck of a lot of debt. And the jobs that they are getting are not sufficient in terms of pay to help them pay off that debt. And she writes, anyway, what I want to write isn't about me, it's about my boyfriend, a talented mechanical engineer who graduated with about $80,000 in school loans. So we're telling the young people of this country, go out and get an education. They're coming out with huge loans, having a hard time getting a job. He was laid off in November 2009, and it has not only caused financial hardship, but it has put all of our future plans on hold. He fortunately has temporary employment now after nearly a year of searching, but my qualm is with the high cost of education and how people in their 20s are supposed to move forward with their lives with school debt lingering over them. And that is a very significant point. Here's another one. This is a young man from Barry, Vermont, in the central part of our state. In 2002, I received a scholarship to St. Bonaventure University, the first in my family to attend college. Upon graduation in 2006, I was admitted to the Dickinson School of Law at Penn State University and graduated in 2009 with $150,000 of student debt. Not uncommon. In Western New York, I could find nothing better than a $10 an hour position stuffing envelopes. Another example of a young person graduating from college, doing all of the right things, and yet ending up with very sufficient. That's from some of the younger people. Then we got some letters from middle-aged people. And this is a woman, again, from the central part of our state. Quote, my husband lost his job in 2002 and has been self-employed as a carpenter ever since due to the lack of jobs in central Vermont. And I should tell you, Mr. President, the recession has been less disastrous in Vermont than in many other parts of the country. And these are stories from a state that has not been hit as hard as some other states. He's had no insurance, and we have not saved a cent since 2002. We've depleted our savings account paying for property taxes. We've been burning wood to save money heating the house. The cost of fuel for the house and vehicles puts a huge burden on making ends meet. Being self-employed is extremely challenging. due to the economic situation. Again, she's touching on an issue that millions of people are aware. Price of gas to get to work is going up. Price of home heating fuel in states like Vermont is going up. Wages are low for millions of people. How do they survive in that crisis? We also have stories from older people, and this is from a woman named Beth who lives in the northeastern part of our state, very rural part of Vermont. And she says, she is 69 years of age, and she says, I don't know what kind of a future my grandkids will have. How will they be educated if we can't help them? It is great that there are loans out there for education, but they are being charged more for the schools than I paid for my house. They will be in debt their whole lives. So here's a woman who's worried about her grandchildren. Here's another woman, Ellen, lives in Rutland County. Quote, all I can say is I still have a job for all it's worth. I feel making $8.81 an hour at 17 hours per week is ridiculous. This woman is 63 years of age. I don't bring home enough to help out with the major household expenses I used to pay half on. I'm lucky if my paycheck reaches $130 a week. By the time I pay a few bills, gas up and pick up a few needed items, I'm lucky if I have any left for spending. I earned less than $8,000 this year. It's just about what I made back in the 1970s and lived better. So point here is, A, if folks tell you the recession is over, read some of these stories. These stories are available on my website, sanders.senate.gov. These are mostly from Vermont, but I think they touch the same themes that exist all over our country. For millions and millions of people, not only those who are unemployed, those who are underemployed, those who are working full-time and not making a living wage, trust me, the recession is not over. And, Mr. President, the reason I ask people to send me this letter, these letters, is that I think it's important as a Senate to understand that we have got to address these economic issues. When 16% of our people are either unemployed or underemployed or have given up looking for work, when millions more are working at inadequate wages, we cannot say that we should not be vigorously going forward in creating millions and millions of jobs that our people desperately need. Mr. President, I also wanted to say a word on Social Security. And what I wanted to say is I get very tired about watching the TV or hearing some of my colleagues tell me that Social Security is going bankrupt, Social Security will not be there for our kids, or Social Security is part of the serious deficit and national debt problem that we face. So let me just say a few words on that. Number one, Social Security has existed in this country for 75 years, and it has been an enormous success. We take it for granted, but for 75 years, Social Security has paid out every nickel owed to every eligible American in good times and bad. When Wall Street collapsed a few years ago, millions of Americans lost all or part of their retirement savings when the stock market crashed. All over America during the last 10, 20 years, corporations that had promised defined benefit pension plans to their employees rescinded on that promise. People had worked for years expecting a pension from a company. That pension never came. And yet during all of that period, Social Security has paid out every nickel owed to every eligible American at minimal administrative cost. That is a pretty good record. And our job now is to make sure that Social Security is strong and vibrant 75 years from now, and continues to do the excellent job that it has done in the past 75 years. Now, people say Social Security is going broke. Social Security is in crisis. And a lot of people believe that because they hear it over and over again, and it's repeated in the media again, and again. What are the facts? So the facts are that not only is Social Security not going broke, Social Security has a $2.6 trillion surplus. $2.6 trillion surplus, which, by the way, is going to go up before it goes down. Social Security, according to the Social Security Administration and the Congressional Budget Office, can pay out every nickel owed to every eligible American for the next 25, 26, 27 years, at which point it will pay out between 75 and 80% of all of the benefits. The challenge that we face, therefore, is how in 25 or 30 years do we make up that 20% gap. That's the challenge. So Social Security is strong, will pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 25 or 30 years. And people say, oh, yeah, well, that's just worthless IOUs, that Social Security Trust Fund. Absolutely not true. The United States government, from the day of its inception, has paid its debt. Social Security is backed by the faith and credit of the United States of America. We have never yet, and I certainly hope we never will, default on our debt. So, Mr. President, the first point that I want to make is Social Security is strong. Social Security will pay out benefits for the next 26 years, and for people to come forward and say, we've got to privatize Social Security, we got to raise the retirement age, we have to lower benefits, is absolutely wrong to my mind. We made a promise to the American people regarding Social Security, and that's a promise we have to keep. Now, what also takes place in the dialogue around Washington is people lump the very serious problem of a $1.5 trillion deficit and a $14 trillion national debt with Social Security. So let's ask a very simple question. How much has Social Security contributed to our national debt? How much? And the answer is not one penny. Not one penny, because Social Security is not paid out from the U.S. Treasury. Social Security comes from the payroll taxes that workers and employers contribute into the Social Security Trust Fund. And that trust fund today has a $2.6 trillion surplus. So when people say, we have got a very significant national debt, and therefore we have to cut Social Security, that is absolutely a wrong thing to say. So, Mr. President, let me just say that I will do everything I can to protect a program that has worked extremely well for the American people. Now, why are we hearing all of this opposition against Social Security? Where does it come from? It doesn't come from ordinary people. They know that Social Security has been successful, that it is worth preserving, worth protecting. And by the way, as we all know, Social Security is not just there for the elderly, the retirees. It's there for people with disabilities. It's there for widows and orphans through the Survivors Fund. Where is all this opposition coming from? It's coming from two places, I think. Number one, it is coming from folks on Wall Street, who are saying, gee, we could make many, many billions of dollars if we ended the Social Security system right now, and Americans had to invest in retirement accounts on Wall Street. And we can make all kinds of commissions doing that work. And that's one of the areas, one of the sources of the opposition to Social Security. Second is from many of my very conservative Republican friends. And very honestly, they do not believe that government should be playing a role in making sure that elderly people have a secure and dignified retirement. They do not believe much in government. They don't think government should be playing a role in those areas, and they want to get government out of those areas. Now, I understand where they're coming from. It's an honest position. I strongly disagree with them. I think that in a civilized, democratic society, we have got to make sure that when you get old, it has to be guaranteed, as it has been for 75 years, that you are going to get the help that you need. I believe government should be playing that role. And I would remind you, Mr. President, that before Social Security was developed in the mid-30s, that 50% of the elderly people of our country at that point lived in poverty. Today, that number is too high, but it is 10%. 50% before Social Security, 10% today. That is a pretty good record. So I would respectfully disagree with my Republican friends who say, well, if people want a retirement account, let them invest in Wall Street. Let them do it through the private sector. I don't agree with that. I think Social Security has worked well for 75 years. We've got to make sure that it works well for another 75 years. And I will do everything that I can as chairman of the new Social Security, Defending Social Security Caucus to make that happen. Last point that I want to make, Mr. President, I want to talk a little bit about the deficit and our national debt. I think it is appropriate for the American people to be reminded about how we got into the very difficult situation we are in right now. And I have to tell you, I find it a bit amusing that some of the loudest, quote-unquote, deficit hawks in the Congress are precisely the same people who helped drive up the deficit and the national debt. Same people. So let's figure out, try to determine how we got into the recession. Number one, in the midst of a recession by definition, less money is coming in. And that is obviously an important part of why we have the deficit and the national debt we have today. But there are other factors. Mr. President, you will recall that this country during the Bush administration began two wars. War in Afghanistan, war in Iraq. The war in Iraq is estimated, by the time we take care of the last veteran, to run up a tag of about $3 trillion. Does anybody quite remember how we paid for those wars? Well, the answer is we didn't pay for those wars. Those wars were put on the credit card. President Bush said we're going to go to war, but we don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about how we pay for them. Second area, as a result of President Bush's tax policies, which have recently been extended against my vote in the Obama administration, we provided many hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. Wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. Their effective tax rate for the wealthiest people in this country is lower than at any time on record, in many cases lower than what working people are paying. And yet we decided, against my vote, to give them hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks, driving up the deficit. Congress voted against my vote to bail out Wall Street. Unpaid for, drove up the deficit. Some years ago, Congress, against my vote, decided to pass an insurance company-written Medicare Part D prescription drug program, very expensive program, unpaid for. So with all of these things that are unpaid for, the national debt goes up, the deficit goes up, and then our Republican friends say, oh, my goodness, we have a very large deficit. What are we going to do? We're going to have to cut back on programs that are important to working people and lower-income people. And I think that that is absolutely unacceptable. So the first point that I would make is I regard it as incomprehensible that there are folks who supported hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, and then they tell us that they are concerned about the deficit and the national debt. That is absolute hypocrisy. And in my view, the United States Congress should not be about cutting back on programs for low and moderate income people after we have given huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. Second of all, I think the time is long overdue that we start ending a lot of the corporate tax loopholes which now are preventing this country and this government from getting the revenue that we need. Before we talk about major cutbacks for our kids or for the elderly, maybe we should end the absurdity of the tax havens that exist in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda, where the wealthiest people in this country and large corporations are stashing their money away to the tune of about $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year in taxes that are not being paid because of the tax havens that exist. I would also argue that it is somewhat absurd that we have a situation where last year ExxonMobil paid no federal income taxes at all, got a $156 million rebate from the IRS after earning $19 billion in profit. So, Mr. President, what I would say is yes, deficit and national debt are very, very important issues. But it is important for us to understand how we got to where we are. It's important for us to understand that the top 1% today earn more income than the bottom 50% and have enjoyed huge, huge tax breaks. So before we start slashing programs that the middle class and working families of this country need, let's take a look at some of those issues as well. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.